Now that idea of taking a set to failure and also achieving a minimum velocity threshold, that wouldn't just apply in this case to 60 kilos. It would also work if we did, say, a set of 4 to failure at that much higher load of 72, 75 kilos. So this relationship between load, velocity, and that minimum velocity threshold is consistent across all lifting, which is a really cool phenomenon that we see for a lot of lifts. Not so much with Olympic lifts and sort of those open-ended ballistic type movements like throws and stuff like that, but your standard lifts, bench press, deadlift, core lift, chin up as well, prone row, all these kind of movements have a very similar load velocity relationship. So minimum velocity threshold, it's unique to every individual, but it's also unique to lifts. So depending on the research you look at will depend on what the minimum velocity threshold is. And so on this graph here, you can see that bench, and depending on your experience levels, will be somewhere between 0.1 and 0.22 meters per second. For squat, it's a little faster because of the greater range of motion, bigger muscle mass, you can accelerate for more, so you're going to have a higher minimum velocity threshold. Deadlift is a little lower again, it's closer to bench press, but deadlift is quite variable depending on whether you go sumo, whether you go conventional, or you use a trap bar. The numbers there are quite variable with deadlift, so it's tricky to measure what the minimum velocity threshold is because it's quite a grinding lift. You can really grind and slowly lift a deadlift up and have slight compromises to your form, but get a much slower mean velocity. So how much you can deadlift is very broad in terms of that minimum velocity threshold and very, very individual. So the concept here is that we take that load velocity relationship before and we look at, say, a novice lifter compared to a more advanced lifter. You can see that the advanced lifter, they might have similar velocities on their low sets, but the advanced lifter is able to maintain high velocities at heavier loads. So they're able to push that 1RM point out even further than the novice athlete because the novice has quite a steep decline in velocity as they reach that 1RM point. And this is really the difference between those athletes. I do think, and this is what you'll read a lot about in some of the papers I'll link below, I have a theory though, and I think that this method of measuring minimum velocity threshold is actually too simple and too much of a simplification for most athletes. Because of a concept called neuromechanical efficiency, which is a concept from Brian Mann, Dr. Brian Mann I mentioned earlier, as we become more neuromechanically efficient, we become better at performing the lift, so we become more skillful as a strength athlete. There's an increase in velocity. An increase in velocity leads to an increase in that 1RM, but it's more than just pushing the graph out. It also pushes your minimum velocity threshold down further, so you can actually continue lifting concentrically at a slower velocity. So graphically it looks something like this. If this is the example we had before, I believe that the minimum velocity threshold for your novice athlete and for your advanced athlete actually becomes spread, where the novice athlete can't achieve as low of a velocity because of a lack of neuromechanical efficiency, whereas the advanced athlete can achieve a lower and slower minimum velocity threshold, therefore pushing their 1RM even further out and further ahead, while the novice's 1RM is actually lower than most estimations would have it at. So there's an even bigger stretch between our advanced lifters and our novice lifters when it comes to the load velocity relationship. I think this therefore makes that minimum velocity threshold idea a tricky concept to fully grasp and fully use with good precision and good accuracy with your athletes. So the idea of accurately quantifying 1RM becomes a lot trickier when we look at it through this lens here, this idea of different minimum velocity thresholds based on lifter competency. And so now we can sort of put that into a table, something like this, where a novice athlete would have much higher and much faster minimum velocity thresholds than a stronger athlete, because the stronger athlete is able to grind into lower and lower velocities but maintain motion on the bar and continue lifting vertically or concentrically. I think this is the real difference. Now I've put core lift there, or trap bar deadlift loads in as well. They are estimates. I don't actually have any data to back that up or any scientific evidence, but I think that's roughly what I'm seeing based on the athletes we've got here in our gym doing velocity-based training. All these will be linked below as well, so you'll have access to these graphs so you can sort of see what's going on and you can start using these numbers with your own athletes. I've also linked below a Google spreadsheet that I've built that you can use to estimate your 1RM based on different exercises. It's got some default minimum velocity thresholds there based on exercise that will auto-populate and auto-fill, and all you have to do is put in the load and the mean velocity achieved by the athlete, and it will graph things automatically for you. If you don't like those minimum velocity thresholds that I've set, that I've sort of estimated out, you can change them and make them manually as well, and that will just change the data you're seeing in the result. What's also cool is you'll get a relative score and an absolute 1RM score for your athletes. And these are the minimum velocity threshold suggestions that I've got in there, but again, you can change them yourself if you need to. So how would you do this? How would you go about estimating 1RM using this method?